Your father stole $85,000. Plead guilty and save us all the trouble.
My father didn't steal anything.
Little girl, I've been prosecuting criminals since before you could spell your name. Sit down.
Bancroft slammed his gavel.
Who is representing this man?
I'm my dad's lawyer.
You? You have no degree, no license, no chance!
Laughter rippled through the courtroom. Every head turned. A 19-year-old black girl standing alone against a judge, a prosecutor, and a system that had already decided her father was guilty before the trial began. Her hands trembled around the manila folder, but her voice didn't. Darren sat at the defendant's table, his eyes red and swollen, watching his young daughter fight for him. But the next time this courtroom went silent, it wouldn't be because a black girl stood up. It would be because of what she proved. Have you ever watched someone silence an entire courtroom with nothing but the truth because you were about to hit like, drop a comment, and let me take you back to where it all started. 3 weeks earlier, Darren Weston knelt under a kitchen sink in the Edgeworth mansion. His knees ached against the cold marble floor. His hands moved with the care of a man who had been fixing pipes for 22 years. Every joint sealed tight, every connection tested twice. Darren was the kind of man who measured his worth in the work he left behind. In the neighborhood of Carlton, Georgia, people knew him as the plumber who never overcharged, the one who showed up on Sundays when no one else would, the one who fixed Mrs. Patterson's leaking toilet and refused her money because she was 81 and living alone. He raised his daughter Willa by himself. His wife, Lorraine, died of cancer when Willa was 8. There was no life insurance, no savings. Just a man with a wrench and a little girl who asked too many questions. Why do pipes break, Daddy? Because nothing lasts forever, baby girl. But if you fix it right, it lasts long enough. Willa grew up in the Carlton Public Library, not because Darren couldn't afford a babysitter, though he couldn't, because Willa wanted to be there. She read everything, history, science, but mostly law. She read about cases where innocent people went to prison. She read about men who looked like her father, convicted on nothing but someone's word. By the time she was 15, she could recite the Fourth Amendment from memory. By 17, she understood case precedent better than most first-year law students. When she got accepted to Howard University on a partial scholarship, Darren worked double shifts for 6 months to cover the rest. You're going to be somebody, he told her the day he dropped her off at the dorm. You're going to be the kind of person they can't ignore. That was September. By October, Darren was in handcuffs. The call came on a Tuesday night. Willa was in her dorm room highlighting a constitutional law textbook. Her phone buzzed. The number was unfamiliar. Baby girl, it's me. I'm calling from the county jail. Willa's highlighter stopped. Her breath stopped. They're saying I stole jewelry from the Edgeworth house. $85,000 worth. I didn't take anything, Willa. You know me, I didn't take a thing. The Edgeworth family was old money in Carlton. Gerald Edgeworth owned 3 commercial properties downtown. His wife Patricia chaired the county arts council. Their name was on the new wing of the hospital. When Patricia told police that her jewelry disappeared the same day the black plumber was in her house, nobody asked a second question. Officers arrived at the mansion and put Darren in handcuffs on the front lawn. They did not search him. They did not search his truck. They did not check the security cameras. They did not dust the jewelry box for fingerprints. They simply took Patricia's word and drove away. Darren was assigned a public defender named Nathan Greer. Greer was 38, overworked, underpaid, and carrying 46 active cases. He met Darren for 12 minutes in a concrete room with no windows. Listen, Greer said, leaning forward. The Edgeworths are connected. The judge on this case is Harold Bancroft. You know what that means. Darren knew. Bancroft had sat on the bench for 30 years. In that time, his conviction rate for black defendants was 94%. For white defendants, it was 41%. Everyone in Carlton knew. Nobody talked about it. If you plead guilty, I can get it down to 3 years, maybe 2 with good behavior. I didn't do it. Darren, I'm telling you, fighting this is a losing game. Then I'll lose standing up. Willa called her father every night. Each call was 15 minutes. Each call cost money they didn't have. Each call ended the same way. Daddy, I'm coming home. No, you stay in school, you hear me? I'm not letting you go to prison for something you didn't do, and I'm not letting you throw away your future for me. But Willa had already made her decision. She withdrew from her classes, packed one bag, and took a Greyhound bus back to Carlton. When she walked into the county jail and sat across from her father through the glass partition, Darren's face crumbled. Baby girl, no. Daddy, yes. She pressed her hand against the glass. He pressed his against the other side. I'm going to get you out of here, she said. I promise. Willa filed a motion to represent her father under Georgia Code Section 15-19-51. The statute allowed a family member to serve as legal counsel under extraordinary circumstances. She typed it on a borrowed laptop in the public library. She printed it at the front desk for 10 cents a page. The ink was fading. She printed it again. When Judge Bancroft received the motion, he didn't just approve it. He laughed. His clerk said she could hear him from the hallway. "Let her," Bancroft told Stanton over the phone. "She'll hang herself and her father in the first 5 minutes. Makes our job easier." Stanton agreed. He filed no objection. In fact, he called Gerald Edgeworth that evening to assure him the case was as good as won. "They're sending a teenager," Stanton said. "This is a gift." The Carlton Gazette ran a story the next day. The headline read, "Teenager to defend father in felony theft case. Legal experts call it reckless." The article quoted 3 attorneys. All 3 said the same thing. She had no chance. One of them used the word irresponsible. Another called it borderline malpractice. Willa's classmates at Howard saw the article. Some texted her words of encouragement. Most didn't. A few shared it in group chats with laughing emojis. One wrote, "She's going to get her dad locked up for life." Willa read the article at the library. She folded the newspaper, placed it in her bag, and went back to work. Her office was a table in the corner of the Carlton Public Library, next to the water fountain that dripped every 4 seconds. She had no investigator, no paralegal, no budget. She had a legal pad, a pen, and a stack of case law she had photocopied for $9.60. Every morning at 6, she arrived before the library opened. The librarian, Mrs. Tate, started unlocking the door early, just for her. She left a granola bar and a bottle of water on the table each morning. She never said anything about it. Willa never asked. Every night at midnight, Mrs. Tate had to ask her to leave. "Child, you need to sleep." "I'll sleep when my father's free." The hardest part wasn't the research. Willa knew how to research. The hardest part was the silence. Nobody in Carlton would talk to her. She knocked on the doors of people who had known Darren for 20 years, people whose toilets he had fixed at 2 in the morning, people whose burst pipes he had repaired in the middle of January without charging for the emergency call, people who had eaten Thanksgiving dinner at his table. "I'm sorry, Willa, I can't get involved. The Edgeworths are powerful people, you understand. Your daddy's a good man, but I got my own family to worry about." One man, a deacon at their church, wouldn't even open the door. He spoke through the screen. "Tell your father I'm praying for him." Then he turned off the porch light. Door after door closed in her face. The community that Darren had served his entire life turned its back the moment he needed them. The same hands he had helped were now pulling away. Willa visited her father every Wednesday and Sunday. Each visit, he looked worse. His jumpsuit hung looser on his frame. The light behind his eyes was dimming. He told her he wasn't sleeping. The cell was cold at night, and the other inmates knew his case. They called him the plumber who got caught. "I didn't get caught," Darren said quietly, "because I didn't do anything." "I know, Daddy. Do you? Because sometimes I sit in that cell and I think maybe I'm the only person in this whole town who believes that." His voice cracked on the last word. He turned his face away so Willa wouldn't see his eyes. But she saw. She always saw. Willa leaned closer to the glass. "You're not the only person. I believe you. And I'm going to prove it." But proving it meant going up against Richard Stanton. Stanton had been the county prosecutor for 19 years. He played golf with Judge Bancroft every Saturday. He had dinner with the Edgeworths twice a month. He had never lost a case against a defendant who couldn't afford a private attorney. His record was spotless. His confidence was absolute. Stanton wasn't worried about Willa. He told his staff the trial would last 1 day, maybe 2. He told them to book the conference room for Thursday because they'd be celebrating by then. His assistant asked if he was preparing a rebuttal for the defense's arguments. Stanton laughed. "What arguments?" The stakes were brutally clear. If Willa lost, Darren faced 10 years in state prison. 10 years. Willa would lose her father, her scholarship, and her future. Everything they had built together would amount to nothing. Every sacrifice, every double shift, every skipped meal, every birthday present he couldn't afford. And Darren knew it. That was the worst part. He lay awake at night in his cell, not thinking about prison, thinking about Willa. Thinking about what would happen to her if he went away for a decade. Who would watch over her? Who would be there when she graduated? Who would walk her down the aisle someday? The thought of missing all of it was worse than any sentence a judge could hand down. But there was something else. Something bigger than one man's freedom. Willa pulled the court records for the past 15 years. What she found made her stomach turn. Case after case. Black defendants, minimal evidence, maximum sentences. The pattern was impossible to miss once you looked for it. A black store owner convicted of insurance fraud on the testimony of one witness. 6 years. A black teenager convicted of vandalism based on a grainy security photo that could have been anyone. 18 months. A black woman convicted of welfare fraud when the paperwork showed a clerical error, not a crime. 2 years. All of them tried in Bancroft's courtroom. All of them prosecuted by Stanton. All of them represented by overworked public defenders who spent less than an hour on each case. Willa stared at the papers spread across her library table. Her hands were shaking. Not from fear, from anger. Pure, focused, clarifying anger. This isn't just about Daddy, she whispered to herself. This is about all of them. She worked through the night. She organized every case into a timeline. She highlighted every inconsistency. She cross-referenced Bancroft's sentencing patterns by race, by charge, by representation quality. The numbers were damning. They weren't hidden. They were right there in the public record. Nobody had ever bothered to look. At 3 a.m, she put her head down on the table and cried. Not because she was scared. Because she was 19 years old, sitting alone in an empty library, carrying the weight of something no teenager should ever have to carry. The fluorescent light above her buzzed, the water fountain dripped, and somewhere across town her father was lying on a metal bed staring at a concrete ceiling, waiting for his daughter to save him. Then she wiped her face, picked up her pen, and kept working. 5 days before the trial, Willa knocked on a door she hadn't tried before. Eleanor Davis lived 2 houses down from the Edgeworth mansion. She was 78 years old, white-haired, and walked with a cane made from a hickory branch her late husband had carved. She had lived in Carlton her entire life. She had watched the town change. She had watched it stay the same. When she opened the door and saw Willa standing there, she didn't say a word for a long moment. She looked at the girl's tired eyes, her wrinkled shirt, and the legal pad clutched against her chest. "You're Darren's girl." "Yes, ma'am. He fixed my kitchen sink last winter. Wouldn't take a penny. Said I reminded him of his mother." Eleanor's voice softened. "I tried to pay him. He wouldn't even let me give him gas money." "That sounds like my dad." Eleanor studied her. "You're the one they're all talking about. The one who's going to stand up in court." "Yes, ma'am." "They think you're foolish." "I know." "Are you—" Willa met the old woman's eyes. "No, ma'am, I'm not." Eleanor held the door open. "Then come inside." They sat at Eleanor's kitchen table. The house smelled like lavender and old books. Eleanor poured tea in chipped cups and listened while Willa explained what she needed. She didn't interrupt. She didn't look away. She was the first person in Carlton who actually listened. "Mrs. Davis, you live close to the Edgeworth property. Did you see anything unusual the day the jewelry went missing?" Eleanor was quiet for a moment. Then she spoke slowly, as if pulling each word from a deep well. "There was a car I didn't recognize, parked in front of their house around 2 o'clock. Not Darren's truck, not the Edgeworth sedan. A silver pickup with a landscaping company logo." Willa's pen stopped. "Landscaping. Greenfield Landscaping. They've done the Edgeworth's yard before. But this time the driver didn't go to the yard. He went through the side gate, toward the back door." Willa's pulse quickened. "Did you see him leave?" "About 45 minutes later. Same side gate. He was carrying something, a small bag. He moved fast, like someone who didn't want to be seen." "Can you describe him?" "Young, white, medium build. I didn't see his face clearly, but I remember thinking it was strange." "Because the Edgeworths usually tell me when they're having yard work done. They didn't mention anyone coming that day." Willa wrote everything down. Her hand moved so fast the letters blurred together. She thanked Eleanor 3 times before leaving. At the door, Eleanor grabbed her wrist gently. "Your daddy is a good man, Willa. This town doesn't deserve him, but you go in there and you fight for him anyway." That night, in her childhood bedroom, Willa researched Greenfield Landscaping. The company had a website with employee photos. She scrolled through them one by one until she stopped cold. Bradley Edgeworth, Gerald's nephew, 28 years old, listed as a crew supervisor. Willa leaned back in her chair. Her mind raced through the implications. Gerald's own nephew worked for the landscaping company. Gerald's own nephew was at the house the day the jewelry disappeared, and nobody had mentioned him. Not the police, not the prosecutor, not the Edgeworths. Because they knew. They had to know. And they chose to let Darren take the blame. The next morning, Willa went back to the library and pulled up the police report. She read it line by line. No mention of any other visitors to the Edgeworth property that day. No mention of a landscaping truck. No mention of a side gate. The report treated Darren as the only person who had been near the house. Willa checked the evidence log. No fingerprints taken from the jewelry box. No surveillance footage reviewed. No neighbors interviewed. The entire investigation consisted of 1 phone call from Patricia Edgeworth and 1 arrest. 1 accusation. 1 black man. That was enough for them. She built her case in 3 layers. Layer 1, the investigation was incomplete to the point of negligence. The police arrested Darren without a single piece of physical evidence. Layer 2, Patricia Edgeworth's testimony contained a 45-minute gap she couldn't explain. Layer 3, there was another person at the house that day, a person with access, a person the family had reason to protect. Willa practiced her arguments in front of the bathroom mirror every night. She timed herself. She adjusted her pacing. She anticipated Stanton's objections and prepared counter-arguments for each one. She practiced keeping her voice steady when she wanted to scream. She practiced staying calm when every nerve in her body was on fire. Her former professor at Howard, Helen Marsh, called her 2 days before the trial. "I heard what you're doing," Professor Marsh said. "Everyone here is talking about it." "Are they saying I'm crazy too?" "Some of them. I'm not one of them." A pause. "The courtroom doesn't care about your age, Willa. It cares about your argument. Make it airtight. Make it undeniable. And whatever you do, don't let them see you flinch." "What if I lose?" "Then you lose standing up, and that matters more than most people will ever understand." The night before the trial, Willa sat across from Darren through the glass partition for the last time. He looked exhausted. His cheeks were hollow. His hands lay flat on the metal counter as if they were too heavy to lift. He had lost 15 pounds since he was hoarse from not using it. In jail, he had no one to talk to. "Whatever happens tomorrow," Darren said, "I need you to know something." "What?" "The proudest moment of my life wasn't when you got into Howard. It wasn't when you got that scholarship. It was the day you were born. Because I looked at you, and I knew the world was going to try to break you. And I knew it wouldn't be able to." Willa pressed her forehead against the cold glass. She could feel the vibration of the building through it. The hum of the fluorescent lights. The distant sound of a metal door closing somewhere in the facility. "Tomorrow, Daddy. Tomorrow they'll know the truth." She drove home in silence. She laid out her clothes, a blazer she bought from a thrift store for $12, a white shirt Darren had ironed for her the morning before he was arrested, still folded exactly the way he left it. She held the shirt to her face. It still smelled like his aftershave. She didn't sleep that night. She sat at the kitchen table with her folder open, reading every note one more time. Outside, the street was quiet. The porch light was burned out. She hadn't replaced it yet because replacing it felt like admitting Darren wasn't coming home to do it himself. At 5 in the morning, she closed the folder and said one sentence out loud. "I'm ready." The call came at 9:30 the night before the trial. Willa was sitting at the kitchen table surrounded by papers, her eyes burning from exhaustion. "Willa, it's Eleanor. Eleanor Davis, can you come over right now? I found something." Something in Eleanor's voice made Willa grab her keys without asking a single question. She drove to Eleanor's house in 7 minutes. The old woman was standing at her front door holding a tablet with both hands. Her face was flushed. Her eyes were wide. "Sit down," Eleanor said. "I need to show you something." Eleanor's late husband had installed a doorbell camera 2 years before he passed. It was one of those smart cameras that saved footage to a cloud server automatically. Eleanor had forgotten about it entirely. She never checked the footage. She didn't even know how to use the app until her granddaughter visited that afternoon and showed her. "I told my granddaughter about your visit," Eleanor said. "About Darren, about the trial. She asked if I had a camera. I said I didn't think so." She checked anyway. She found this. Eleanor pressed play. Her hands were trembling. The footage was clear, time-stamped, dated the exact day the jewelry disappeared. At 2:43 p.m., a man walked out of the Edgeworth property through the back gate. He was young, white, wearing a Greenfield landscaping polo shirt. He carried a small canvas bag pressed tight against his chest, the way someone carries something they don't want others to see. He looked over his shoulder twice. Then he got into a silver pickup truck and drove away quickly. Willa paused the video. She zoomed in on the face. Her breath caught. Bradley Edgeworth. She zoomed in on the timestamp, 2:43 p.m. Darren had finished his work and left the property at 2:30. Patricia didn't call the police until 3:15. Bradley was at the house during the exact window when the jewelry disappeared. 13 minutes after Darren left, 32 minutes before the police were called. And no one had mentioned his name, not once. "Mrs. Davis," Willa said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Can you send me this video?" "Already did. Check your phone." Willa looked at her phone. The file was there, 54 seconds of footage that changed everything. She sat in Eleanor's kitchen for a long time after that. Her thoughts moved carefully, deliberately. She couldn't present this video at the beginning of the trial. If she did, Stanton would object on a technicality. Bancroft would find a reason to exclude it. They would suppress it before the courtroom ever saw it. And once it was excluded, she could never bring it back. She needed to wait. She needed Patricia to testify first. She needed Patricia to say under oath that no one else was at the house that day. She needed Gerald to confirm it. She needed them both to commit to the lie on the record. Then she would play the video. And their own sworn testimony would become evidence of perjury against them. It was a gamble, the biggest gamble of her life. Everything depended on timing. If Bancroft shut her down before she could present it, the video would never see the light of day. If Patricia or Gerald suddenly remembered Bradley's visit and corrected their story, the trap wouldn't work. But Willa knew something about people who lie under oath. They commit. They double down. They believe their own version because they've told it so many times. They never expect a 19-year-old girl from a public library to outthink them. She drove home and placed the video file on a flash drive. She taped the flash drive inside her manila folder between pages 42 and 43 of her case notes. She wrote 3 words on the outside of the folder in small letters that only she could read. Wait for it. The Carlton County Courthouse had not seen a crowd like this in years. Every bench was full. Reporters from 3 local stations set up cameras in the back row. Law students from the State University drove 2 hours to watch. They all came for the same reason. They wanted to see the girl fail. In the back row, in a gray blazer and reading glasses, sat a woman no one recognized. Margaret Hollins, 56 years old, judicial inspector for the state of Georgia. She had been investigating Judge Harold Bancroft for 6 months, 16 complaints, a pattern of racial bias in sentencing that stretched back 2 decades. She was here to observe. She had a notebook and a pen. She did not identify herself to anyone. Bancroft entered the courtroom with the weight of a man who believed he owned it. He settled into his chair and adjusted his glasses. He looked down at Willa the way a man looks at an insect on his desk. Miss Weston, I will remind you that this court extends you a privilege, not a right. Do not waste it. Understood, Your Honor. Stanton stood first. He was tall, polished, confident. He buttoned his jacket with one hand and addressed the court like a man delivering a lecture to children. The facts of this case are simple, he said. On October 14th, Darren Weston was hired to repair a pipe at the Edgeworth residence. That same day, jewelry valued at $85,000 disappeared from a locked drawer in the basement. Mr. Weston was the only non-family member with access to that area. Mrs. Edgeworth's testimony is clear. The conclusion is obvious. He paused. He looked at Willa. The defense may try to distract you with emotion. Don't let it. This is about evidence. Willa stood. She smoothed the front of her blazer. She took one breath. The prosecution says this is about evidence. I agree. So let's talk about evidence. She called her first witness. Officer Daniel Reeves, the arresting officer. Reeves walked to the stand with his shoulders square and his chin high. He had done this before. He wasn't nervous. Officer Reeves, you arrested Darren Weston at the Edgeworth residence on October 14th, is that correct? Yes. Did you search Mr. Weston at the time of arrest? We conducted a standard pat-down. Did you search his vehicle? A pause. No. Did you search his toolbox? No. So you did not check any of the locations where an $85,000 piece of jewelry might have been concealed? We relied on the witness testimony. Willa nodded. One witness, Mrs. Edgeworth. Did you interview any other witnesses? There were no other witnesses. Did you canvass the neighborhood, knock on doors, ask if anyone saw anything? No. Did you check for security cameras at the Edgeworth property? Mrs. Edgeworth stated there were no interior cameras. I didn't ask about interior cameras. Did you check for exterior cameras, doorbell cameras, cameras on neighboring properties? Reeves shifted in his seat. No. Did you dust the jewelry box for fingerprints? No. Did you collect any DNA evidence from the drawer? No. Willa let the silence sit. She let every person in that courtroom count the number of times this officer said no. Officer Reeves, let me make sure I understand. You arrested a man for stealing $85,000 worth of jewelry. You did not search him. You did not search his vehicle. You did not check for cameras. You did not take fingerprints. You did not interview neighbors. Your entire case rests on the word of one person. Reeves stared at her. His jaw tightened. Is that standard procedure for a felony theft investigation? We followed protocol. Whose protocol? Willa asked. Because I've reviewed the Georgia Bureau of Investigation's guidelines for felony property crime. They require at minimum a search of the suspect, a collection of physical evidence, canvassing of the immediate area, and review of available surveillance. You did none of those things. Not one. Stanton stood. Objection, she's testifying. She's asking a question, Willa said, not taking her eyes off Reeves. Bancroft leaned forward. Watch yourself, Miss Weston. Yes, Your Honor. She turned back to Reeves. One final question, officer. In your career, have you ever arrested a white suspect for felony theft based solely on one person's verbal accusation without any physical evidence? The courtroom held its breath. Stanton looked down at his notepad. He didn't object. because there was nothing to object to. The question was clean. The answer was obvious. Reeves didn't answer. His silence said everything his words never would. No further questions. Willa sat down. Her hands were steady. Her folder rested on the table in front of her, the flash drive still taped inside. Behind her, she heard something she hadn't expected. A murmur. Not laughter this time, something else. The first crack in the wall the courtroom had built around her father. Darren turned and looked at his daughter. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. His eyes said it all. She was no longer the girl everyone came to watch fail. She was the reason this trial was about to change. In the back row, Margaret Hollins wrote something in her notebook and underlined it twice. After the lunch recess, Patricia Edgeworth took the witness stand. She wore a cream blazer with pearl earrings. Her hair was freshly styled. She placed her manicured hands on the wooden rail and smiled at the judge the way old friends smile at each other. Mrs. Edgeworth, Stanton began, please describe what happened on October 14th. Patricia's voice was calm, rehearsed, and wrapped in the kind of confidence that comes from never being questioned. I hired Mr. Weston to fix a pipe in the basement. He arrived around 1 o'clock. I showed him to the basement and left him to work. When I returned around 3:15, I noticed my jewelry box had been disturbed. A diamond necklace, 2 rings, and a bracelet were missing. The total value was $85,000. And who had access to the basement that day? Only Mr. Weston. Thank you, Mrs. Edgeworth. Stanton sat down. Willa stood up. She approached the witness stand slowly. She held no notes. She had memorized every question. Mrs. Edgeworth, you said my father arrived at 1 o'clock. Is that correct? Yes. And he was in the basement working on the pipe? Yes. How long did the repair take? I'm not sure exactly. An hour and a half, maybe 2 hours. So he would have finished around 2:30, maybe 3? I suppose. You said you discovered the jewelry missing at 3:15. Is that correct? Yes. Where were you between 2:30 and 3:15? I was in the garden. The entire time? Yes. Were you alone? Patricia's fingers tightened on the wooden rail. A small movement, almost invisible, but Willa saw it. Yes, I was alone. Was anyone else in the house during that time? Any visitors, any service workers, anyone at all? Patricia glanced at Gerald. It lasted less than a second, but Willa saw that too. No, no one. So my father finished his work at 2:30. You noticed the jewelry missing at 3:15. That's a 45-minute gap. During that entire time you were alone in the garden. You didn't see or hear anyone enter or leave the property. That's correct. No family members stopped by? No. No employees, landscapers, delivery drivers? Patricia's composure flickered. Her left hand moved to her earring. No. Mrs. Edgeworth, I want the court to understand your testimony clearly. Under oath, you are stating that no one else was on your property that afternoon, not a single person between 2:30 and 3:15. Patricia straightened her back, her voice hardened. That is what I said. Willa paused. She let the answer hang in the air. She wanted every reporter, every spectator, every person in that gallery to remember exactly what Patricia Edgeworth had just sworn to. Because tomorrow, that sworn testimony would become the evidence that destroyed her. Thank you, Mrs. Edgeworth. No further questions at this time. Willa sat down. Stanton exhaled. Bancroft seemed satisfied. The testimony was clean. Patricia had been clear, composed, and consistent. She had looked the courtroom in the eye and lied without blinking. But Willa's folder sat on the table, and inside it, the flash drive waited. Your Honor, Stanton said, the prosecution rests. Bancroft nodded. The defense may present its case tomorrow morning. Court is adjourned until 9 a.m. The gavel fell. People stood. Conversations erupted. Stanton shook Patricia's hand and told her she did wonderfully. In the hallway, Stanton turned to his assistant. This will be over by noon tomorrow. The girls got nothing. His assistant nodded, but she noticed something. Willa Weston was walking out of the courtroom with the same expression she had walking in. No fear, no frustration, no defeat. Something else entirely. Something that looked, if you were paying attention, like patience. In the back row, Margaret Hollins closed her notebook. She had filled 11 pages. She made a phone call from the parking lot. I need another day before I file, she said. Something's happening here. I want to see how tomorrow goes. 9 a.m. The courtroom was more crowded than the day before. Word had spread. People stood along the walls. The bailiff had to turn people away at the door. Willa arrived early. She set her folder on the table. She placed one hand on top of it. She waited. Bancroft entered and called the court to order. Miss Weston, you may present your defense. Thank you, Your Honor. I'd like to call Gerald Edgeworth to the stand. Stanton shot to his feet. Objection! Mr. Edgeworth is not on the witness list. Under Georgia Rule of Evidence 611, I have the right to call any person with direct knowledge relevant to the case. Mr. Edgeworth is the property owner and was present on the day in question. Bancroft paused. He didn't want to allow it. But denying it now, after allowing Willa to proceed this far, would create a record of bias. He glanced at Stanton. Stanton shrugged slightly. I'll allow it, but get to the point quickly. Gerald Edgeworth walked to the stand like a man walking into his own living room. He was confident, comfortable. He had nothing to hide, or so he believed. Mr. Edgeworth, does your nephew Bradley Edgeworth work for a company called Greenfield Landscaping? Gerald blinked. It was the first question, and it was already wrong. Not wrong as in incorrect, wrong as in unexpected. Yes, he does. Has Greenfield Landscaping performed work at your property before? They've done some yard work, yes. Was Bradley at your property on October 14th? Gerald's confidence cracked for the first time, a hairline fracture barely visible. No, he was not. You're certain? Absolutely certain. Willa nodded. Mr. Edgeworth, yesterday your wife testified under oath that no one other than my father visited your property between 2:30 and 3:15 on October 14th. You are now confirming the same, is that correct? That's correct. Thank you. Willa turned to the judge. Your Honor, I'd like to submit Defense Exhibit A. She opened her folder, removed the flash drive, and handed it to the court clerk. She placed one hand on top of it. She waited. Bancroft entered and called the court to order. Miss Weston, you may present your defense. Thank you, Your Honor. I'd like to call Gerald Edgeworth to the stand. Stanton shot to his feet. Objection! Mr. Edgeworth is not on the witness list. Under Georgia Rule of Evidence 611, I have the right to call any person with direct knowledge relevant to the case. Mr. Edgeworth is the property owner and was present on the day in question. Bancroft paused. He didn't want to allow it. But denying it now, after allowing Willa to proceed this far, would create a record of bias. He glanced at Stanton. Stanton shrugged slightly. I'll allow it, but get to the point quickly. Gerald Edgeworth walked to the stand like a man walking into his own living room. He was confident, comfortable. He had nothing to hide, or so he believed. Mr. Edgeworth, does your nephew Bradley Edgeworth work for a company called Greenfield Landscaping? Gerald blinked. It was the first question, and it was already wrong. Not wrong as in incorrect, wrong as in unexpected. Yes, he does. Has Greenfield Landscaping performed work at your property before? They've done some yard work, yes. Was Bradley at your property on October 14th? Gerald's confidence cracked for the first time, a hairline fracture barely visible. No, he was not. You're certain? Absolutely certain. Willa nodded. Mr. Edgeworth, yesterday your wife testified under oath that no one other than my father visited your property between 2:30 and 3:15 on October 14th. You are now confirming the same, is that correct? That's correct. Thank you. Willa turned to the judge. Your Honor, I'd like to submit Defense Exhibit A. She opened her folder, removed the flash drive, and handed it to the court clerk. The clerk plugged it into the courtroom's display system. The screen lit up. Timestamp, October 14, 2:43 p.m. The Edgeworth back gate. A man walked through it, carrying a small canvas bag close to his chest. He looked over his shoulder. He wore a Greenfield Landscaping polo. His face was clearly visible. Bradley Edgeworth. The courtroom erupted, not in laughter this time, in shock. Gasps, whispered disbelief. Someone in the gallery said, "Oh my God." Gerald's face drained of color. Patricia, sitting behind him, pressed both hands over her mouth. Mr. Edgeworth, Willa said, her voice steady as steel, you just testified under oath that your nephew was not at your property on October 14th. This video, recorded by a neighbor's doorbell camera, shows Bradley Edgeworth leaving your back gate at 2:43 p.m. 13 minutes after my father finished his work. 32 minutes before your wife called the police. Gerald opened his mouth. No words came out. Would you like to revise your testimony? Stanton jumped up. Objection! The source of this video has not been authenticated. Willa turned to Stanton. The video is from the doorbell camera of Eleanor Davis, who lives at 412 Magnolia Lane. The footage is time-stamped, date-stamped, and stored on the Ring Cloud server. Mrs. Davis is available to testify to its authenticity. Bancroft gripped his gavel. His knuckles whitened. This video may not be admissible. The defense did not disclose it during discovery. With respect, Your Honor, I obtained this evidence last night. Georgia Rule 16 allows late disclosure of newly discovered evidence when it is material to the defense. This evidence is the most material thing in this courtroom. Bancroft's jaw clenched. He wanted to exclude it. Every instinct told him to exclude it. But the courtroom was full. Reporters were recording. 100 people had just watched Bradley Edgeworth walk out of that house with a bag in his hands. Excluding it now would be the end of his career. And somehow he knew it. The video will be admitted,
he said through his teeth. Willa turned back to the courtroom. She looked at Darren. His eyes were wide, his hands pressed flat against the table. She looked at the gallery. She looked at the reporters. She looked at Judge Bancroft. "My father is a plumber," she said. "He has been a plumber for 22 years. He has never stolen anything in his life. He was arrested without evidence. He was charged without investigation.
He was brought before this court because he was the only black man in a white woman's house on the wrong day." Her voice did not rise. It did not waver. It carried the weight of something much heavier than an $85,000 necklace. "My father didn't steal anything, but something was stolen. His dignity, his freedom, 3 weeks of his life, the trust of a community he served for 2 decades. I'm here to take all of it back." The courtroom was silent. Not the mocking silence of the first day, a different silence, the kind that comes when every person in a room realizes they are watching something they will never forget. Before Bancroft could speak, a voice came from the back of the courtroom. "Your Honor, if I may." Margaret Hollins stood. She reached into her blazer and produced a state-issued identification badge. The courtroom turned to look at her. "My name is Margaret Hollins. I am a judicial inspector with the Georgia Office of the Inspector General. I have been conducting an investigation into this courtroom for the past 6 months." Bancroft's gavel hand froze. "During the past 2 days, I have observed multiple irregularities in the conduct of this trial. The presiding judge has repeatedly interrupted the defense's legitimate questioning. The presiding judge attempted to exclude clearly relevant evidence. The presiding judge displayed a pattern of conduct consistent with the 16 formal complaints filed against him over the past 2 years. The courtroom was absolutely still. "Under Georgia Code Section 15-1-10, I am ordering the immediate suspension of Judge Harold Bancroft. A full disciplinary review will follow. This case will be transferred to the Superior Court for retrial before an impartial judge." Bancroft's face turned white, then red. His mouth opened and closed twice without producing a sound. "You can't do this," he said. "It's done," Hollins replied. 2 court officers stepped forward. They stood on either side of the bench. Bancroft looked at Stanton for help. Stanton looked at the floor. Bancroft stood slowly, removed his robe, and walked out of the courtroom through the side door. He did not look at anyone. The room exploded. Voices, movement, reporters calling their stations, but in the middle of it all, one moment was perfectly still. Willa walked to the defendant's table. Darren stood. He wrapped his arms around his daughter and held her so tightly that neither of them could breathe. "You did it, baby girl," he whispered. "You did it." "Not yet, Daddy, but we're close." The retrial took place 11 days later. The new judge, Judge Catherine Price, reviewed the evidence in its entirety. The doorbell camera footage, Officer Reeves' admission that no physical evidence was collected, Patricia Edgeworth's sworn testimony that no one else visited the property, directly contradicted by video evidence. On the 3rd day, Judge Price delivered her ruling. "The court finds the defendant, Darren Weston, not guilty on all charges. The defendant is to be released immediately." She paused. "The court further recommends an investigation into Bradley Edgeworth for the theft. Gerald and Patricia Edgeworth should also be investigated for perjury." Darren collapsed into his chair. He covered his face with both hands. 23 days in a jail cell. 23 days of cold food, sleepless nights, and the suffocating weight of knowing that the world had already decided he was guilty. It was over. Bradley Edgeworth was arrested 4 days later. Police found the jewelry in a storage unit registered under a false name. He confessed within an hour of questioning. Gerald Edgeworth was charged with perjury for lying under oath about Bradley's presence at the property. Patricia Edgeworth was charged with filing a false police report. Their attorneys negotiated for months, but the evidence was overwhelming. Richard Stanton resigned from the district attorney's office before the internal review was completed. He never practiced law in Carlton again. Harold Bancroft's disciplinary review uncovered 31 cases in which his sentencing patterns showed clear racial bias. 14 of those cases were reopened. 6 convictions were overturned. 6 men and women, all black. All of them had spent years in prison for crimes they did not commit. Some were punished far beyond what the offense warranted. Bancroft was permanently disbarred. The story spread beyond Carlton. National news networks picked it up. The 19-year-old who took down a courtroom became a headline on every major platform. Legal journals published analysis of the case. Civil rights organizations cited it in reform proposals. Howard University reinstated Willa's enrollment and awarded her a full scholarship. The dean called her personally. "We don't just want you back," he said. "We need students like you." Morrison and Associates, one of the most respected civil rights law firms in Atlanta, offered Willa a guaranteed internship upon graduation. The founding partner, James Morrison, told reporters, I've been practicing law for 35 years. I have never seen a first-year student demonstrate the kind of legal instinct Willa Weston showed in that courtroom. Eleanor Davis refused every interview request. When a reporter knocked on her door, she simply said, "I didn't do anything special. I just told the truth." Darren would have done the same for me. Professor Helen Marsh called Willa the night after the verdict. "I told you the courtroom doesn't care about your age. You were right. No, you were right. You were right when everyone else was wrong. That's harder." On the night Darren came home, the porch light was on. Willa had replaced the bulb that afternoon. It was the first thing she fixed since coming home from Howard. They sat on the porch steps together. The same steps where Darren used to read to her when she was small. The same steps where he told her about her mother. The same steps where he said goodbye when she left for college. "Your mama would have been the proudest person in that courtroom," Darren said. "She was there, Daddy. I felt her." Darren put his arm around his daughter. The night was warm. Crickets sang in the grass. The streetlight at the end of the block cast a yellow circle on the pavement, the same one Willa used to stand in as a child pretending it was a spotlight. "So," Darren said, "my baby girl's really going to be a lawyer." Willa smiled. "Daddy, your baby girl already is one." They sat there for a long time, not saying anything. They didn't need to. Some things don't need words. Somewhere across town a light was on in the Carlton Public Library. Mrs. Tate was shelving books. She paused at the table in the corner next to the dripping water fountain. There were still pencil marks on the surface from where a 19-year-old girl had pressed too hard while writing her case notes. Mrs. Tate ran her fingers over the marks. She smiled. Then she turned off the lights and locked the door, but she left the table exactly as it was, because some things, she thought, should be remembered just the way they happened. Willa Weston didn't just win a case. She proved that truth doesn't need a title. It doesn't need a degree. It doesn't need permission. It just needs someone brave enough to stand up and speak it. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Like this video, subscribe to our channel, and remember the people who change the world are rarely the ones the world expects.
The story is over, but one thing keeps sticking with me. 147 record cards in the shoebox in the closet for 23 years. Nobody asked her to keep them. No spreadsheet, no database, no quarterly reports that said track the children. Miss Thelma just decided that every kid who walked through that door mattered enough to document. So she wrote a note on each one. What they struggled with, what they improved, how long they stayed. That's the part that haunts me. We measure everything: revenue, test scores, click rates, engagement. We have dashboards for everything that make money. We have metrics for things that generate profit. But the thing that kept kids off the street for 22 years, that life in a shoebox. Nobody counted it. Nobody funded it properly. Nobody looked at it until a man in a suit stood up at a board meeting, opened a box that smelled like a paper, and said, "I'm number 83. We kept asking for proof that these programs work. The proof was standing in the room. The proof had a degree. The proof built bridges for a living. So here's my question. What's in your shoebox? What's the thing you have been doing that nobody cares but everybody needs? Drop it in the comments. Share this with someone who needs it. And if you haven't subscribed, you already know.